Thank you all for joining us today. I'm Juan Villanueva. I'm co-founder and director of Type Electives. We are an online design school that's shaping the future of type through courses and programming that go beyond traditional design education, from type design to lettering to critical theory and creative technology. We collaborate with people who bring respect, responsibility, criticality, and love into their practice, and we are always excited to welcome students who share those values. Today, we're kicking off our spring lecture series, which is a space where we invite new and established voices to share their stories, knowledge, and ideas with our community. And this season, our Design and Community series is highlighting community-driven creative spaces and multidisciplinary practices that reflect the heart of our school. This series is bringing together designers, studios, archives, and creative collectives whose work bridges art, design, education, and publishing and community engagement. And we're going to explore how these groups build collaboration, social impact, and cultural dialogue, and how these hybrid creative spaces are shaping the future of design. We're starting today with Noble Science and David Barnett. February 13th, we're going to hear from the Chicago Design Club with Christian Solórzano. In March, we're going to spend some time with Buena Gráfica Social Studio. And on the 6th, we'll talking to Zame Projects. And we'll close the season with Letra Muerta, joined by Faride and Uriana Nusi. So each session includes a short presentation, a conversation, and an open Q&A. And all talks are recorded, and they will be available on our website over the weekend. So before we dive in, though, I have a couple of announcements. Applications are now open for Provoking Type. This is an amazing class led by the brilliant Chesa Garbett, founder and creative director of Firebrand Creative House. Provoking Type is a 5-week class that invites participants to take a critical and decolonial lens to type. Chesa's and our guest lecturers, they explore the role of typography in history, culture, technology, and power, centering BIPOC and other histories while challenging dominant narratives in the craft. It is a space for creatives who want to get into good trouble with type and use design as a tool for positive change. Each edition of this class features guest lecturers who speak to the most urgent conversations in design. Applications are now open until Friday, February 20th, and we also offer a pay-what-you-can option. If you are looking for a thoughtful and critical space to discuss type and design, this is the class for you. I also want to highlight our new section where we share deeper conversations with our community, featuring our faculty, our students, and collaborators. And for this, I have to give a huge shout out to Kate, our graphic designer, who has shaped this series with very thoughtful writing and amazing design. If there's something you'd love to see on the blog, please send us a DM. We're always open to ideas. And if you've taken a class with us in the past, we'd love to feature your work. We have a submission form in our website, and on Linktree/Type Electives, show us what you've been making. Here are a few simple ways that you can support our mission. You can contribute to our scholarship fund, subscribe to our newsletter, follow us on social media and YouTube, share our classes and events with friends and colleagues. Every little bit of support helps us keep programs like this running. And we're also launching a sponsorship initiative to help sustain the work that we care deeply about, which is offering scholarships, supporting educators, and keeping lecture series like this free for everyone. If you or your organization believe in the work that we're doing here and want to help us out, grow this community, we'd truly love to connect. And with that, let's get started into today's event. I'm thrilled to welcome today's speaker, David Barnett. David is a graphic artist and preservationist from New York City. As a creative director, he has worked in design, illustration, apparel, publishing, branding, and signage. In 2013, he co-founded his own studio called Noble Science, specializing in branding and signage rooted in New York vernacular lettering traditions. As an extension of this mission, in 2019, he created the New York Sign Museum, a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to preserving the 20th century advertising from New York metro area. He's a graduate of Type at Cooper Extended Program, a recipient of the TDC Ascenders Award. His work has been profiled in the New York Times, The New Yorker, Gothamist, Artnet, WNYC, Hyperallergic, ABC News, NBC New York, NHK, and now Type Electives. So today, David will be sharing the noble path, preserving New York's vernacular signs and stories. As we know, signs are storytellers of New York. They carry the stories of the people and the places behind them. David is going to explore how these signs function as design artifacts and also as vessels of collective memory. During his work at Noble Science and the New York Sign Museum, he's going to show us why preserving them is not just nostalgia, it's actually community, it's craft, and it's keeping our shared stories alive. So please, everyone join me in welcoming David to our virtual stage. And now, please take it away, David.
Thank you so much, Juan. And Thank you for all of the amazing work you do with Type Electives. It's super inspiring, and it's an absolute honor to be able to participate and speak here today. Let me just pull up my slideshow and then I'll get started. All right. So thank you all for joining today and giving me a chance to talk a little bit about New York signage and the New York vernacular. I love talking about what makes New York signage so special and unique to me, and how that informs the work that we do, both with our studio, Noble Signs, and nonprofit, the New York Sign Museum. I began designing and learning to paint signs in 2010, and from the onset, I tried to locate that practice in response to the visual culture of New York City. I could already see then that these signs that made New York City feel special and unique, that represented the visual character of the city I'd grown up knowing, but had in a way always taken for granted, were quickly disappearing. Inspired by the work of Stephen Powers and James and Carla Murray, I tried to think of Noble Signs as a counter to this. If we were going to be putting work out into the New York City streetscape, I wanted to design it with context and respect for our local area. And sometimes that meant exercising a bit of self-control to design, not trying to reflect myself or my own personal tastes, but really more with a universal lens to capture some of that iconic New York style that was already vanishing and multiply it back into the streetscape. And suddenly I became obsessed and inspired with this energy that I could see running through handmade signs from New York City, especially in the 20th century. It had a quality, a personality, and flavor that really made you feel the personality and energy of both the artist who made it and the business owner who commissioned it. These people were real New Yorkers with their own diverse backgrounds and experiences who still found common ground and were part of a shared collective identity. And you could see that in the work. Vernacular is the native language or dialect of a specific group of people. There's a visual vernacular to New York City's 20th century lettering and signage, and an aesthetic that we can tie to the specific place and time. A vernacular is learned locally, not in a classroom or from books, but person to person and from observing the world around you. The signage trade in particular operated in this way. While there was a sign graphics trade school on the East Coast until the early 2010s, most sign painters came up through an apprentice system, either studying with an individual painter or as part of one of the many sign shops that existed here over the course of the 20th century. In either case, whether they were novices or master craftspeople, these artists were producing work that had certain similarities. Bold lettering, primary colors, alphabets designed for speed and maximum impact. The work needed to be produced fast and sent out in a crowd, and you needed to be able to read it. So with Noble Signs, we set out to study this vernacular, to decode what made it resonate with us so deeply on a personal level. And to answer this question, what is this New York style beyond just you know it when you see it? What defined the aesthetic and feel of the old New York, the one that I picture in my mind's eye when I think back to being a kid, and what made it so special and unique? This has gradually become the center of my design practice over the last 15 years, and Noble Signs has grown to a team of 15 people, designers, artists, archivists, and craftspeople working together to keep this local style alive in our streetscape. Our research-based approach looks to the layered history of the world around us to steward the New York vernacular design and sign-making traditions into the present and future. As an extension of this mission, we established the New York Sign Museum in 2021. A nonprofit archive, gallery, and living art project dedicated to preserving and educating people about the city's lettering, advertising, and signage cultural traditions. Housed in our East Brooklyn studio, the museum now hosts public tours, lettering workshops, and community events that reconnect people to the city's visual identity. Our growing collection of over 200 historic signs, from Essex Card Shop to Cascais Supermarket, offers a tangible link to New York's past. We started saving signs both to study them and as a counter to the cultural erasure that we saw happening around us. It was almost an act of protest done out of emotional necessity from that pain that I felt seeing something beautiful being cast aside, and that feeling of your heart dropping into your stomach when you walk past a storefront that had a beautiful sign and one day it's gone. So although we started saving signs as art objects, I think as we've brought the project into the public, what's emerged is what these signs mean to us all and what they represent at a human level. Pictured here is one of the first signs I ever saved from the corner deli in Crown Heights on Franklin Avenue, right around the corner from my house. It was replaced by a Dunkin' Donuts, which recently closed as well. Handmade signs and storefronts really do define our lived experience as New Yorkers and bring meaning to our daily lives. When you walk out of your door every day and see these signs that were made by your neighbors for your neighbors, it creates a feeling of belonging, of neighborhood itself. There's this idea that by extension, the signs were made for you too. They invite you in for a coffee or sometimes just to chat after a long day. Signs become visual markers of our communities, landmarks, meeting places, hung on venues for celebrations big and small. When this rich culture vanishes, replaced by global chain stores with generic signs that erase local character, this feeling of uniqueness goes with it. Signs are symbols. They express community identity, history, and local pride. When we lose them, we really do lose a part of who we are. Hand lettering is imbued with some quality of the person who made it. And in this way, our vernacular lettering contains all sorts of big and boisterous New York personalities. The cultural diversity of the city is reflected in its visual diversity, and yet it all seems to fit together in an eclectic, sometimes messy way. The broader visual vernacular of New York streetscape shows a shared respect for restraint, for not wasting each other's time. It's direct, yet it's playful and inviting. It makes us feel like we are home. And that feeling means something, and it's what we're trying to capture in our work. Noble Signs is a multidisciplinary creative studio based in New York City, founded by myself and Mac Pohanka in 2013. Our company began with a twin focus on design and craft manufacturing, and we've preserved that ethos over the past decade. Here we are working on some early projects in our first shop, which was in the basement of Mac's apartment building in Bed-Stuy. And here we are in our current home in East New York, Brooklyn. We relocated to this unique pre-war factory building in 2018. Our mission as a studio is to create storefronts, brand identities, and artworks that speak to history and the present moment. We want New York City to continue to have a unique visual identity, and by keeping these local styles alive, we hope to create a positive effect in the place that we live and work. Noble Signs practice exists in response to shifts in technology, culture, design trends, and the urban environment. By treating design as a live medium rather than a static product, our values extend beyond design into cultural practice, experimental preservation, and even social intervention. As a studio, but also a public space, manufacturing facility, and cultural participant, we're deeply embedded in the visual economy of New York. We design with context, not within a vacuum. And as our work has expanded beyond signage into branding, campaigns, and public art, we've continued to maintain that approach. Noble works where design and collective memory meet. To reimagine craft as a living situated act. We want to locate our work within the New York vernacular, while also showing how this type of hyperlocal design thinking can light a path towards a better future. Our studio approach is deeply research-based. Although our process always begins with a pencil, we also work digitally, using all modern tools at our disposal to offer the best quality product in the most efficient manner to our partners. Drawing from our archive of signage, photography, and publications, we look to locate many of our storefront projects with an anchor that connects them to local history and our collective memories. We believe craft itself can be a living situated act, and that materials themselves can carry meaning. For this reason, we favor bespoke techniques, including hand painting, neon, gold leaf, and hand-worked metal fabrication, not just because they look better, which they do, but because the skilled touch that they require naturally imbues the work with the humanity of the craftspeople that made them. Our ways of working are unique. Although our designs are mostly lettering based, we rarely use fonts, instead drawing our letter forms out by hand and then scaling it for production from the pencil sketch. In this way, we're able to channel the New York vernacular into our work in both inspiration and application, with designs inspired by history and created by hand to maintain the human connection that can only come from a person. There's this idea of unseen effort. When you do lettering by hand, you're not just tapping into the moment that you do it in, but really tapping into all of the hours that you've spent building that craft and building that practice. And all of that time, it's perceivable in the work. I think there's a part of our human nature that makes us respond to something that someone spent time doing. And we really, when we see something like that, it really evokes something in us that makes us feel a connection. So while we do recontextualize our reference points into new concepts, sometimes we're so inspired by a classic storefront, we try to find a way to directly link it to a new project. It's our way of continuing a thread that was abruptly ended, bringing a friendly design ghost back from the dead and giving it new life with a business position to the present and the future. I'm going to just talk about a few projects that Noble Science has done in the past couple of years that I think show the way that we try to interface with the past and bring that into the work that we do. Obviously, we're always looking to our library and to references and inspiration for how we're going to approach a project. But sometimes we really do get the opportunity to do one where we find a touch point that speaks to us in a super meaningful way, and we're able to align with a client to create a design that actually directly references a sign that we loved from New York's past that's sadly been lost. This is the story of this project that I'm about to share started on Facebook Marketplace when I saw this civil service bookshop sign listed for sale a couple years ago. The price was a little bit high, and we were sort of debating if it was something that made sense for the museum to acquire. And by the time we decided that we did want to acquire it, it had already been sold. The collector's spirit in me, I think, really started to beat myself up about that. And it's such an amazing sign. I think it really speaks to so many of the touch points of the New York vernacular that we are trying to channel in our work. And I was pretty bummed out that we weren't able to get this one in the collection. And I kept thinking about it over the weeks that followed. And as it turned out, a city councilman named Justin Brannan reached out to us and asked us to design a sign for his office in Coney Island. I thought of the Civil Service Bookshop sign and how that could be an amazing piece to reference for Justin's sign. And he gave us complete creative control in the project. And when we brought this idea to him, he loved it. So we set out with our process. As I mentioned, we start with the pencil, but we're not Luddites. We use every tool at our disposal to make sure that we're able to offer work that has personality, character, handcraft, but done in the most efficient way possible, so we can offer the product to our clients at the best price and make it accessible to as many people as possible. So you can see here just a bit of how we concept our work, from thumbnail sketch through to digitization. We often like to present color ups, like I have them shown here on the right. I think this is how, actually, if you ever have the opportunity to look at old sign shop sketches, this is how they often presented color mock-ups. If you were doing this entirely by hand, obviously it's a lot quicker to just colorize a small segment. But even digitally, I think there's a benefit to working like this because it requires the client to engage their imagination a little bit and to not assume that the digital thing that they're seeing on the screen is going to be the final product. And in the case of our work, it truly isn't. So we like to share work like this and to let people try to picture it with the idea of it being made by hand and not it just being something like we're used to, where you just design it digitally and then hit print. Once we have an approved direction, we go into production. There's some here of our process. We work with a method called pouncing. This is a technique that was used by sign painters throughout the 20th century, but it actually dates back as far as the Renaissance. Essentially, what you're doing is perforating paper with tiny holes and then putting chalk dust through them to create a transfer onto a substrate. This allows us to take a vector file, scale it to any size, and then transfer that artwork onto a panel that we're going to paint without having to actually print onto the panel or anything like that. Custom mix enamel. This is mixing the background color, which ultimately got sprayed, and then letter everything by hand using fine painting enamels. And here you can see the work in progress. I really just love the boldness of this sign, the clarity of messaging, the use of color. There's a lot that I was really happy with about how this one turned out. And here you can see the final work in situ. And just some details. And for something like this, what we may do, when you think about sign painting, you often think about single stroke lettering, which I think is the core of the sign painting aesthetic, and the way that you should approach sign painting if you're trying to learn it is by starting to letter off the brush and let the brush dictate the forms. But when you're talking about New York signage, a lot of it, you're usually talking about large format work. And that type of lettering is drawn and then painted. So you're not actually working with the brush when you're painting, a 12-inch tall letter. You're usually going to draw it out and then use the brush to render it, but the brush doesn't dictate the form. But this time we created these little inset panels, and for those we did just freehand letter these off of a skeleton. So this is it was a nice opportunity to kind of bring in, whenever we can, we do try to bring in a bit of that freehand lettering touch, because I think you see so much personality in it and you really feel the hand of the person that made it. Here is another project, starting with the inspiration. This is Glazer's Bake Shop, which was a legendary family bakery uptown in Manhattan that sadly closed a few years ago. We were approached by Radio Bakery, a Brooklyn bakery that was opening its second location, and they actually came to us wanting to do a sign that was an homage to Glazers. So those are the kind of projects that we immediately get very excited about. There's a lot that I love about this sign, from the coloring to the messaging. I think it's just there's just a real beauty in the simplicity of it, and it has so much personality. You really do, you feel something when you see it, and I was very excited to have the opportunity to channel that into a new storefront. This particular storefront was in a landmark historic district, and we, having done this now in our 13th year of making signs in New York City. We have been through this many times and have figured out how we talk to landmarks to try to get them on board with the ideas that we're doing. I think there's sometimes there has sometimes been a disconnect. There's, it's hard to say, oh, well, we want to do this sign that's like historically rooted, but we're rooting it in the 1950s, right? But the building was built in the 1890s, but we want to have a sign that's rooted in the 1950s, and kind of trying to sell that. I think a lot of times, understandably, landmarks wants to have things speak to when the building was built, but I think it is a question of like when you're trying to preserve history, New York history is layered and it's complex. And I think we don't like to look at history as being static, and we do think of it as fluid, and that overlaying of different eras in one storefront is often what makes it so interesting. So we've sort of honed our technique for how we present an idea to historical committee, and this one we actually had a bit of a struggle, because this rendering you see here, they originally had asked us to make the sign the width of the storefront. And this is one thing, most signs in New York City classically would use every bit of available real estate that they had. So you often see signs that bridge over the residential door to take up the full width of the building, not just the full width of the storefront. And the guidelines that we got back on this was that the sign should be the width of the storefront, but it should be centered on the building. So then it ended up being like off centered to the storefront and not taking up the full width. So we ended up going back to the community board, putting together a pretty robust presentation for why we wanted the sign to be bigger than that. And they actually responded really positively. So we ended up getting the width that we wanted, and we, in the same process as I showed in the Justin Brannan sign, we sketched by hand, digitized, created this concept that spoke to the Glazer sign, but also spoke a bit to radio themselves, and thought about some copy that we felt like really anchored the sign in the era that we were trying to evoke. And for the technique, there's a style of a style of fabricated lettering that goes by many names. Some people call it jewel light, some people call it gold trim lettering, but it's a style that you definitely know if you've ever paid attention to signs in New York. They're basically plastic letters wrapped in a metallic plastic trim. And these letters have, they often have a lot of hand to them, because although it is a fabricated letter, it's a fabricated letter that you can produce with no fancy machinery. So you see how these letters are produced in our shop. You can cut these plastic letters out either with a laser, or traditionally they would have been cut with a skill saw, and then they're hand banded using nails on a fabrication table. And you end up with this letter that has a really neat quality, dimensionality, but still has a lot of texture and hand to it. We spent a lot of time painstakingly trying to match the color of the Glazer sign. And I think the end result came out exactly as we had hoped. Here you can see it being installed, and finally side by side of the inspiration and the new sign that we made. And in the end, this sign was really well received by the neighborhood, by historics, and yeah, we were really happy with this project. So the last project I will talk about started with this sign, the Clover Deli sign from East Midtown. And this is another sign I think that meant a lot to New Yorkers. It was very sad when when Clover Deli closed. This was early on in our preservation mission. I want to say it was right after the pandemic. And we had actually been in talks to potentially try to salvage this sign for the New York Sign Museum, but it was a bit out of our capabilities. The sign needed a lot of work. It was very big. We didn't really have the space to properly display it. And it actually ended up at the American Sign Museum, which I think was a great outcome. And they have it prominently displayed. If you ever have a chance to go there, you'll be able to see this sign in person. But it stuck with me as a sign that we wanted to try to take some inspiration from for a future project. I think obviously if you love lettering, this sign will speak to you because it has really unique letter forms. It also has a really unique construction. Without getting too technical, most neon signs are either on a cabinet or a raceway. This is a channel letter neon sign. So you have these stainless steel cans with the neon tubing mounted inside the channels, and then those channels are then mounted on a raceway being like a thin strip, like what Delicatessen is mounted on, versus like a cabinet being like a full panel that all of the lettering is mounted directly to. This one's really interesting because they have lettering mounted to the face of the raceway, and then they also created this lip ledge to mount lettering on top. So a few years later, we had the opportunity to work with Veselka, one of my favorite local businesses, who were, for the first time in their 75-year history, opening a second location in Brooklyn. And it was a particularly great opportunity because it was a one-story building that they were fully occupying, and it faced the BQE, which I think if you've driven down the BQE, you know that there's some cool signs still visible from there as you're passing through Williamsburg and Greenpoint. And just, I think making signs, one thing that we love about it is just how many people see it, right? There's just this sense of putting work out there into the world that will impact so many people, whether they pay attention to it or not. It's something that they're going to just recognize, and it's going to become a landmark in their neighborhood or on their commute that they drive by every day. So having this opportunity to work both with like a amazing small business like Veselka with such a wonderful legacy and an amazing product. Their food is fabulous. And also in a location where we knew it was going to be seen by so many people was a really exciting opportunity. And our original proposal was for a sign that canted off the roof that ended up getting rejected by Department of Buildings. So we came back to this idea of this Clover sign and the way they had created this unique construction with this raceway and the letters with the ledge on top. And we tried to adapt that for Veselka. And you can see here, we brought in those very same details and even some of the lettering details from the Clover sign, as you see in the swatch on this V. And the final storefront here, one of my favorites we've done, two large neon signs, one focusing on the name Veselka, and then this other one, which I really love, this subject forward sign. It says restaurant, and then on the reverse, it says coffee shop. And this one isn't quite as direct a parallel as the previous two projects I showed to the inspiration, but I think if you look at them, here's just some installation process. I think if you look at them side by side, you can really see how we try to filter inspiration and channel it into our work. And I'm really proud of how this one turned out. Very happy every time I get to drive by it on the BQE. So our hope is that with Noble Signs, we have this space here in East New York where we have a studio and we have a shop, and we have two teams working in both locations, but we keep them interconnected in so many ways. Basically, everybody who works here, regardless of what team they're on, is going to have some connection to the other team, some knowledge of what the other team is doing, and we all work together, collaborate on every major project. I think it's something that unfortunately is really lacking in our society now, where we so often design things and then job them out to three different vendors and go with whoever has the lowest bid. And there's economic realities that drive that. But the fact is, when you separate design and manufacturing in such a significant way, you lose that connectivity that allows you to make something that's really special and unique. I think we're able to have physical objects that feel really grounded in humanity. With the people that made them, having connection in all steps of the process, you're able to tap into something that otherwise is really hard to grab onto. And we've always viewed our practices like a bit of a throwback to what we think of as the golden age of sign making in New York, the post-war period from the 40s through to the 60s, when you had artists and designers who were working together under one roof, pushing forward creatively, innovating, and having craftspeople, trades, and makers really working together hand in hand, the two arms working together to make things that are so spectacular they're almost hard to imagine today. So hopefully by having a studio and a shop working together as we do now, our goal is to be able to kind of scratch at that greatness that we see in the work that inspires us so much. Another big neon sign we made recently for Res. So while the sign industry was once a haven for artistic talent, it has been reshaped gradually but dramatically since the advent of the vinyl plotter in the 1980s. In the pre-digital era, you couldn't really work at a sign shop without a basic understanding of hand lettering. And most people entered the trade at the lowest level, earning their stripes painting an endless queue of no parking signs that were constantly in need because, New Yorkers love to block each other's driveways. In fact, they were probably building on skills that they learned in grade school when lettering was still commonplace and pedestrian, and penmanship still mattered because it was a necessity. You need to write a letter, you need to make a flyer for a bake sale or a poster for a community event. Well, you better hope your lettering looked decent, because there really wasn't Kinko's or fast signs to help. You either had to hire a letterer, sign painter, or you had to do it yourself. So I think we can really stare with wonder at an old handwritten letter and just like be amazed by the beautiful handwriting our grandparents had. But I don't think they were really showing off. It was just doing something that they'd done their whole lives, and the muscle memory kicked in, and the proof was right there in the letters and how beautiful they were. I think the reality is that in their heyday, there was really nothing glamorous about having the skill to produce beautiful lettering, much less being a professional sign painter. In the mid-20th century, sign painters were even referred to as lettering mechanics, which shows how the trade was regarded. It was just a job like any other, and if you knew how to draw, it was a good way to make a living. As evidence of this, it was only after I've been painting signs for 4 or 5 years that I received a call from my grandfather in the Bronx, and he said, "Oh, I heard from your mom that you're painting signs. That's what my father did, and my brother too. They had a shop in Manhattan in the Film Arts building." No one had ever told me about that. It was just, it was something that, it wasn't something that was celebrated. He That said, he did remember the address, and the building is still there today, which I think is pretty cool. He said that they had made all kinds of signs, but primarily it was for the theater and film businesses in the days when movie posters were still painted by hand. And of course, my first question was, did you save anything? But the answer was no. I dug really deep, reached out to several extended family members to see if they had, but nobody had saved any of the old signs. Only after my grandparents passed away years later did my uncle and I find this portrait of my great grandfather at his easel, along with his business cards, buried in a box in their attic. But none of the sign work or lettering was saved. It just wasn't considered precious at the time it was made. And I think only in hindsight we can look back with wonder at what people were capable of back then. Ultimately, becoming proficient in lettering is less about natural talent and more about putting the time in to get it right. Much like learning to play a musical instrument, it's a challenge that requires hours and hours of practice, probably about 10,000 before it becomes effortless. And in our current era of constant distraction, this might seem like a pretty hefty challenge. But I think once you start that journey, you'll find that it pays dividends, both in work and in your personal life. There's a deep meditative quality that comes from doing skilled handwork, whether it's lettering, fabrication, or any type of craft. And I think it's sadly a sort of fulfillment that is lacking for many people nowadays. Yeah, from my own personal experience, I think there's a confidence that comes from learning how to letter, a mind-body connection, and a belief in yourself and your own abilities that transcends the medium into other aspects of your life. And if you're interested in learning this skill, I highly recommend it. This is a picture of me at my easel during the pandemic, which was probably when I put in a lot of hours to doing a lot of lettering. And I think you can see how happy it makes me from that photo. But whether you're intent on learning lettering or not, I think every designer would benefit from some direct involvement in the production process of the work that they create. When our culture was more local, depending on your field, you might have had the ability to visit a press or a factory in your own city or even your own neighborhood to see how something that you had conceived of was actually going to be made and be involved in the process. But sadly, globalization has made this challenging in many fields. And the economic realities of making things in America, much less New York City, are very complex. In spite of that, we keep pushing forward with this model at Noble Signs, and we'll continue to do so as long as we're lucky enough to have clients who see the value in it. So just to segue from there into talking more about the Sign Museum and the work we're doing here in Brooklyn. I've been a collector my whole life, like many designers. And I think once I started paying more attention to old signs, I really couldn't stop. That deeply emotional reaction that I felt seeing some of the signs I loved walk by every day, seeing them disappear overnight, essentially, compelled me to start saving signs in the mid-2010s with help from my team at Noble. And first, we were just saving signs. We've been asked to replace keeping them in the backyard of our first shop. And then I started staking out businesses that I could tell would be on the verge of closing. It's often an uphill battle saving signs, maybe especially in New York. When you tell someone you want something of theirs that they were planning to throw away, they suddenly want to ask the same question every time: how much is it worth? But the reality is that most of the signs that we save are too big to be hung in people's homes. And as a result, the most common destination is the dumpster. Here's actually another bodega, also from Crown Heights, on the block that I lived. When I moved there were two yellow bodegas across the street from each other. And we ended up saving all of the signs from this storefront, including the awning, and have them on display here at the museum. Our archive has objects, ephemera, and publications that showcase the diverse vernacular lettering styles of New York City advertising. And our collection features a wide range of styles, from photo letterings, one-line manual, to hand-cut vinyl signs done by anonymous artists on the Lower East Side, and everything in between. We don't focus on perfect exemplars, but really try to capture pieces that represent the true diversity of high and low design present in the New York streetscape. By studying the signs we've saved and being able to get up close to them and analyze the details and their inner workings, we've learned aspects of the craft of sign making and lettering that would otherwise be lost. Our project seeks to recognize the artistry and pride embedded in New York City's vernacular letters, to inspire artisans to expand upon the craft, and to preserve these signs as tools for design education, storytelling, and reclaiming the visual language of place in the face of accelerating globalization. Oops. Some signs we recently saved from Barry Pork Store in South Brooklyn. This was a store that meant a lot to the neighborhood, and sadly closed earlier this year. Here you can see the owner, George. And this sign, I think, obviously character-driven stuff always really speaks to people, and the cannibal pig in particular, I think, was pretty iconic in Brooklyn. When we were saving the signs, there were so many reactions from customers coming in to say goodbye, to say thank you to George and his team for everything that they'd done for the community. And we captured this interview that I'm just going to play quickly for you guys, because I think it really sums up a lot of what we think about.
I remember this beautiful Body Pork store since I was a little girl. When I came in this country from 1976, I met Tony, his staff. They were very nice to me and my parents. And going back, it was very difficult for my dad and for my mom because we didn't speak no English. So I was the only girl come here and speak with Tony what my parents need. Now, today, my mother giving me a bad news. She said, guess what? I'm a 93 years old, and Body Pork store is closing down. It's very sad, but what can we do? It's a part of our life. And I wish Tony and all the staff the best and luck. Now it's a new chapter for them. And Body Pork store, it will be in my heart and my parents too.
Yeah, no, thanks for sharing that with us.
Yes, it's very sad. Sorry,
No,
I don't feel.
That's why we're doing
It's very
this.
sad. It's very emotional to see
Memories
this.
are so important, you know?
Yes.
It's like, it's a part of who we are and part of our community.
Well, that's how life is. One day we're here, one day we're gone.
Are you happy to know that the Sign Museum is going to save the signs that are outside?
Yes, I'm very happy because it's not going to be another Body Pork store. And it will stay in the museum, like the rest, although it's an old memory that we keep in the past. And for the new generation, they will learn the way we grew up. So it's very good. It saves everything, all the information on the museum. Good luck.
And this was a particularly interesting sign save because thinking about that layered history that's hiding all over New York. We took down this sign, which dated back to the 70s. We found an even older sign, probably from the 50s, for a Latticini store, showing the Italian roots of this neighborhood in Bensonhurst. And we were able to save the even older sign as well. So it was a very cool opportunity, although bittersweet because the place really meant a lot to the community. Here's another sign that we recently brought into our collection, House of Oldies. This was a amazing record store in the West Village, and we connected with the family who had actually saved the signs themselves when they closed during the pandemic. And they graciously donated them to us. And in addition, we were able to sit down with the owners, Bob and Gail, and record their story. And we're going to be working on a piece that we'll be sharing over the next few months with their history. It's very interesting stuff. And another sign we recently saved, this was, I think, the beginning of last year, Louis Zuflocht. This was like a sign on Stanton Street in the Lower East Side that the business had closed decades ago, but the sign was so beautiful and so iconic that multiple businesses had occupied the storefront, but decided to keep the sign up. I think there'd been a art gallery, a vintage store, and the sign always survived, but the building is actually being torn down. So we worked with the developer and were able to acquire the sign, including all of the original porcelain panels and all of the lettering. None of the neon was extant, but someday we will plan to recreate the neon tubing and fully restore this sign. It's just a really neat piece. Great lettering. Great copy too. Smart clothes. Another sign that we saved, I guess about a year and a half ago, Smith's Bar in Midtown in Hell's Kitchen. Another big, very big corner neon. The longest side is about 40. This is the short side. The other side, the street side, is about 40 feet wide. This one was a project, and it was a day about as cold as today when we took it down. And we weren't able to save this projecting box because the weed dispensary that took over this location wanted to reuse it for their sign. And signs like this are grandfathered in, so you have to leave the box up if you're going to try to keep a sign like this. You won't be able to put up a new box of this size. So we decided to remake the box and actually restored it to its original color, because as you can see, the signs were originally this off-white porcelain and then eventually buffed out to a black in, I believe, in the 90s. So we recreated this in our shop. And here you can see the moment where
I'm hidden enough here, right?
Yes, you're hidden.
Okay.
All right, 3, 2, 1.
So as we save more and more signs, I think we really do go deeper and deeper into this question of what is lost. Disappearing handmade signage erodes our shared urban experience. This is why people grieve when signs come down. Vernacular signs hold our collective memory, visually, culturally, and emotionally, and they contain stories both known and unknown, stretching across generations. Consider how we interact with our lived environment when it looks like this, brimming with character and personality, versus this. This is the same corner in Midtown Manhattan shown in the 1950s and as it looks today. I think the loss is more than aesthetic. These visual markers of humanity carry our sense of community, and without them, our emotional connection to the urban environment is weakened, if not depleted entirely. We're New Yorkers, and these signs mean something to us. They represent something we once took for granted that's being taken away, and we're fighting back one sign at a time. We'll always have the memories, but we want more than that. We want something to share with the next generation, and this is why we started the New York Sign Museum. So I'm just going to quickly talk a little bit about how design can function as a carrier of lineage, and with lettering in particular, being that expression of our collective identity. So although no place or people is a monolith, we can agree there's a certain consensus on New York attitude. You'll hear that if you're walking too slow down the street in Midtown. New York fashion, we all have a black jacket, and New York appetites. Don't talk to us about deep dish pizza. In the same way, I think you'll find an endless variety of styles in New York signage, but there's a common current that runs through, bringing us together as a city. The New York vernacular is a direct response to the city itself. Our signs are informed by the architecture of our commercial spaces, the visual and cultural makeup of the city and its people, and the density that sets New York apart from other American cities. I have 4 features of the vernacular outlined here: sign typologies, subject emphasis, local lettering, and economy of space and color. Talking about sign formats, the majority of signs we save and produce are classic New York sign style, the painted panel top sign. Manhattan was originally divided into a grid with the commissioner's plan of 1811, and most stores are set widths 14, 18, 20, 22 feet. And unlike most cities in the Northeast, we have tall sign bands above many of our storefronts, allowing for large, bold top signs. Signs were typically made by mounting thin sheet metal on rigid frames. Early signs were made of wood and then later steel on wooden frames. Once aluminum became accessible, everything changed. Aluminum's lightweight. It can be worked with standard hand tools and doesn't corrode. Signs post 1970 are usually mounted on aluminum square tube, which is the same method that we use to make our signs today. These signs also make up a large portion of our collection. Aluminum top signs are often painted by hand, but with the introduction of acrylic dimensional lettering, these gold trim letters I talked about earlier became widespread as a way to add some extra pop to these signs without having to invest in any special machinery. You see some signs that we've made in the trim letter style. I'm a big fan of this. I think it's just such a classic look. And this look, I think the gold trim letters on aluminum top sign, it may be the defining signage type of late 20th century in New York City, and you still see it used today. It might seem like a pretty basic format. It is essentially just a piece of thin metal with a frame around it, wrapped around a metal substructure and then slapped on the building. But getting these materials in other cities can be challenging. In New York, they still remain ubiquitous. So if you do visit the American Sign Museum in Cincinnati, which has the greatest collection of American signage in the world, you'll actually see few signs of this type. It's just our humble bread and butter sign type that fits New York perfectly because it's affordable, lightweight, fast to produce, and lends itself to bold, unadorned messaging. Another defining feature of New York vernacular signage is a clear subject forward emphasis and a focus on legibility. When we look at this LNG meat market sign shown here, we know instantly what the business sells: meat. You don't really need to know or much care who LNG are. The sign really tells you everything you need to know. And I think there's a certain humility in that runs counter to our current culture. And I think there's a real case for why it matters and is worth reconsidering. In this post-Apple world that we live in, it's very common for not just signs, but whole brand identities to not tell you what they are or do. I think subject emphasis has been replaced with brand emphasis, and now everyone has a logo and a brand, even your corner coffee shop. These are just a few signs that I've seen around my neighborhood that just irk me in various ways, mostly because they don't really tell you much about the business or what it does, or they're just very hard to read and interpret. Signs are a communication method, and if you're not communicating what the business is doing clearly, then I don't think it can be successful as a sign. When design decisions were left to sign makers, as they were in the pre-digital age, there was a clear consensus on what the sign should do, tell you what the business sells. So the best sign for a coffee shop was one that said coffee shop. I don't know when we lost the plot on that and how we ended up with coffee shops that look like this. I think there's a certain decency in telling people what you do in such simple terms. It creates, to me, a feeling of inclusivity. When the sign says restaurant, you know that if you're hungry, you should go there to eat. All are welcome and all belong. The push towards more opaque identities can start to feel like a litmus test. Oh, you don't know what that place is? Well, maybe you should just keep walking. In this way, the power of subject forward messaging multiplies. When you have an entire avenue where every business is clearly communicating what it does, then it starts to feel more like a neighborhood than just a street. I picture walking down Metropolitan Avenue with my grandmother who lived in Queens her whole life and never learned to drive. Why would you when you could just walk down the avenue and everything you needed was right there? The bakery, the butcher, the fish market, the five and dime. Every shop front felt like a community space and people knew your name everywhere you went. This is powerful. And I don't think it's lost today, but it has diminished significantly. Every New Yorker does still know that feeling of walking into your corner deli at the end of a long day and feeling home before you've even set foot in your own door. I think when people visit New York from other places, they often comment on our bodega culture because it does still feel like something special and something that's really like a throwback to this previous era when stores were meeting places and points of connection. There was a great article in the Times recently by Anna Cody that broke down the visual vernacular of Sesame Street and how it's evolved over the years. And she talks about how the creators wanted to make Sesame Street feel like a real New York City neighborhood so that kids in the inner city could relate to it. That meant having it not be perfect and shiny, but have grime, wear, and tear, familiar faces, and also shop fronts that welcome you in with open arms. And I think no coincidence that every shop on Sesame Street has a sign with a subject forward emphasis. That's the feeling of belonging that I believe signage can foster. Looking at our vernacular in New York, beyond type and format, I think as a student of hand lettering and type design, I've been particularly fascinated with the nuances of the local New York style, and I've been trying to codify that into something that feels cohesive. Lettering on New York signage is often sans serif, bold, and condensed. And digging deeper, the most commonly used alphabets tend to be what type designers would describe as a geometric sans, meaning lettering built off a square or a rectangle. So our curved letters like B, C, O, S, P, and R are not perfect ovals as they appear in traditional American sign painting, but rather a more industrial modular letter form. You see this type of lettering across thousands of signs in New York City. And in our collection, you'll see a ton of lettering just like this. I think the first reason has to do with speed and efficiency. It's just easier to teach an apprentice how to brush letter off of the square. It can be drawn out with a ruler, where rounder letter forms require more practice and time to produce. If you're hand cutting the lettering, either for a mask or a dimensional form, this is doubly true. Straight lines are fast and curves take more time. And this is New York, right? So everyone always needs everything yesterday. So there's a real benefit to working with lettering that can be produced quickly across different mediums. I think the other reason connects back to the sign typologies. As I mentioned, the top sign format in New York is so effective because it's easily adaptable to many different widths. Geometric sans serif lettering has the same quality. It can easily be made extended or condensed, sometimes even comically so, to suit the needs of a specific sign dimension. So if the sign needs to say laundromat, with these alphabets, you can use a fundamentally similar design for a 12-foot wide sign or a 30-foot wide sign. You simply extend the lettering as needed. And this sometimes comes to bear in a very specific way in a corner storefront. You might have two panels of dramatically different widths that need to have the same content. So this can result in some comically squished or extended lettering, but it shows how useful this type of lettering can be with the urban grid we're operating with in New York City. Here's a contemporary example of this design challenge from Canal Street. I actually appreciate a lot about this sign, but I think they actually missed the mark because they didn't use a geometric sans. And if they had, you wouldn't see all of the distortion that you see in this sign. So yeah, as a result of their usefulness, I think these styles proliferated locally, and the more ubiquitous they became, the more they were copied and repeated by artists and makers observing the world around them. That's how vernacular lettering takes off, right? It's an idea that you see in the streetscape around you, you see in the world around you, and you copy it and bring it into your own work. These styles are also frequently used in transit signage, which may have been one of the original sources of inspiration. And while there are similar modular alphabets used in signage across the country and globally, I think New York has a unique modular geometric style. There's a directness and a focus on legibility So whereas other modular lettering might use an unusual cap N that looks like a lowercase n, the New York style often replaces this with the more traditional form. I think our design really tends to cut through a lot of the flair and just try to get to the point. And that's often what makes it feel so fresh. That's just one of the many lettering styles. I think in the New York vernacular, there's also, as I mentioned, as you get into smaller lettering, you have a lot more opportunity for single stroke. Here's another style that you see a lot in New York. We call chisel lettering. It's a more calligraphic lettering approach, and you often see it in show cards or on painted truck doors where there's lots of small copy. But again, the style is really about speed, and it's one that can be painted really rapidly. It flows off the brush, just like handwriting. We're actually hosting a workshop on this style next month at the Sign Museum with John Boxell, a really talented lettering artist based in New York. And the last feature, I know I'm a little over time, so I'll just run through this quickly, but the last feature I just will speak on relates to layout, color, and design. New Yorkers were always in motion, taking everything in, but filtering what really resonates. There's simply so much stimuli that this kind of mental sorting happens organically. I think in response to this, our vernacular style has a bold and streamlined quality and an economy of space that is essentially, I guess that you could call it like a Bauhaus approach, right? It's like you don't see wasted space on a classic New York sign or any significant unnecessary decorative elements. Every element serves a function, communication. And real estate is valuable, so we maximize it. And this is what falls by the wayside when signs that were designed with a specific space in mind are replaced with generic logo signage. Suddenly you're left with a 2-foot diameter circle in the middle of a 20-foot sign band. I can only imagine how that wasted space would make our sign predecessors cringe. And I can only imagine how they would feel seeing vertical signs that are designed with a logo turned on its side. I think color is used in a similar fashion. Primary colors, particularly yellow, are used repeatedly in New York vernacular. Most famous example is the yellow bodega. I've shown several examples of those in this talk already. It's been speculated that yellow base with red, blue, green, and orange was popularized by Dominican American sign makers who brought that aesthetic with them from their home country and created an iconic design trope for neighborhood corner stores starting in the 1970s. But it can also just be seen that they were building off an existing design language that focused on grabbing people's attentions and universal appeal. Yellow is a great color for sign making because you can use basically any color on yellow and still get good contrast. These basic color palettes may feel childish to some people, but I think that can be a good thing if you're trying to speak to everybody, children to elderly and everyone in between. Primary colors are a great way to do that. And that's the charm of New York vernacular design. It's both clean and contemporary, but it's never cold and it's never sterile. It's straightforward enough to appeal to everybody without ever feeling like it belongs to only some. As designers, I think there are many lessons we can learn from vernacular design. Today, minimalism remains crucial, but authenticity and warmth has become the most sought after value as a counter to an increasingly homogenized and mass-produced society. The looming rise of AI is only highlighting the importance of authentically human work. New York's design style, as embodied in its signage, represents a really ideal marriage of simplicity and character. And it shows us a model for how we can bring personality back into our visual world without abandoning modernity. When simple forms and colors are rendered digitally, they often feel flat, but that little hint of humanity, that unseen effort that comes through when these forms are executed by hand, creates a visual intrigue that really shows how something minimal can also be personal and inviting. And as more and more designers start to feel this way and bring hand into their lettering and into their design work, I think there's an opportunity for us to create a world that we want to live in and end this crushing trend towards sameness that society seems to be moving in. So it's great to see the response that people have to the work that we're doing and the interest in learning hand lettering. I think it really shows that this isn't a feeling that only we have. People all over the world are feeling like there's an absence of character and an absence of humanity in the design world and in the world that's being basically forced on us, right? The visual culture of sameness and banality. So I think the work we were doing, over the last 15 years to codify this New York vernacular into something knowable, teachable, and accessible continues to resonate, and it's continuing to evolve. Noble Signs has more exciting local design projects on the horizon for this year, and the mission of the New York Sign Museum continues to grow in scale as we look to the future of the project and how it can be both a living archive and a site for social change. Preservation is challenging. You often feel like a salmon swimming upstream against the forces of change that would soon make every major city on Earth unrecognizable from each other. Pressure from real estate industry, rapid turnover in a post-pandemic world, and a lack of institutional recognition for the value of commercial signage. These are all real threats that we're pushing back against. And sometimes for every victory, it feels like there are two defeats, but I do take comfort in knowing that we're preserving this local vernacular and craft for future generations. And in 50 years, I like to think that people won't remember the signs we didn't save, but be very happy about the ones that we did. And we'll continue to save signs, and we have saved in 2025, we saved more than ever before. The museum is expanding its reach to other initiatives as well. Our oral history projects is going to be launching, as I mentioned, with this House of Oldies story in the next couple months. And we're interviewing not just sign makers, but also business owners and, as you saw, neighborhood residents who have lifetimes of experiences and memories to share. I think documenting these stories is really key to our mission. As craftspeople, as designers, we of course appreciate the signs for their artistic value. They're beautiful objects and worthy of preservation on their own. But the stories they hold, the stories of real New Yorkers and what these places meant to them, tells an even more universal and powerful message. They remind us that community creates belonging, that self-sacrifice can be rewarding. And I think I can say for myself, there are a few things that bring more personal fulfillment than working with your hands, especially when it's in service of your neighbors and seeing that the work that you produce brings them joy. This used to be commonplace, and we've forgotten how much it matters. So we hope to educate people both about the value of having a thriving local vernacular here and in other cities across the world. Our education programs are continuing to expand. And we hope that people will learn more about the craft and about the value of the work that we're preserving. I think with education, real change is possible, and it starts with building awareness. And finally, we hope to position the museum as an advocate for small businesses themselves, to teach people to appreciate their local mom and pops while they still can, and inspire young people to start their own businesses. We want to be an institution that fosters community building and highlights the power of design in that conversation. So to wrap up, what can we as designers do to help advance these causes? We can make work that honors the vernacular of its setting, consider context in our approach, and become advocates for preservation wherever we are. I'm sure many of you are already undertaking that work. The design community can keep working together to keep craft alive and keep our streetscapes full of humanity, character, and personality. And hopefully this talk today has shown some of the ways that's possible. Looking at these signs from long ago, we may be overwhelmed by their spectacular quality. And it might be true that with today's realities, producing work like this would be nearly impossible. But while signs like this might not be coming back anytime soon, and Times Square will almost certainly never look like this again, no matter how much I wanted to, we can still channel something equally spectacular at any scale. Design can reflect how we see ourselves, our neighbors, and our community. It can reflect us as a part of something bigger and be a conduit for everything we love about living in New York. Its diversity, its messiness, its boldness, how fun it can be, and how familiar it feels in spite of its size. Preserving local vernacular is not just about nostalgia. It's about being stewards of something greater, of our shared memories and our irreplaceable collective culture. Thank you.
Wow, that was amazing. Thank you so much, David. Everyone really loved it. And yeah, amazing comments in the chat, and also a lot of questions. Unfortunately, though, we're running a bit over time, and I know some folks have to get back to work or get back to other things. That said, I do want to acknowledge everyone's thoughtful questions. I feel like you've done a really great job, David, at answering a lot of them already. So I encourage them to like go back to the recording. It's been really awesome to hear about your values, your philosophy, especially the responsibility towards history and community building that you're doing. I also really appreciate all the honesty about the struggles, both the victories, the things that you're working through as this project started, and it's thinking about the future. And a couple of questions, maybe just the last thing I want to ask, just to consolidate some of the question is like, do you have plans for an online archive? Like, can people visit the space? Maybe tell us a little bit more about that. And lastly, how can we support you and this amazing project that you're putting together with a large team?
Yeah, we are working on building our online archive, cataloging and documenting all of the work, starting mostly with ephemera because it's a little bit more manageable. Creating true, digitizations of the large format signage in our collection is a challenge, but we have we're working on different approaches to get it done. I would hope that in the next year, we'll be launching a public archive as well as a membership program for the museum. In terms of what can be done to support, I mean, I think, if you haven't already, please come by if you're able to, book a tour. We have some amazing folks on the team here who are really passionate about this stuff, and I think they are great stewards of what we're doing. And if you're able to come by and see a tour, I think it'd be well worth your time. Beyond that, we'll be making, this is a year where we're really trying to take some significant step forward for the nonprofit. And we are going to be making some big fundraising pushes. So if anyone has any potential leads on, funding opportunities or potential donors, obviously, please reach out to us. And yeah, if I think even beyond our project, just at the local level, I think as designers, we all have the ability to engage in this act of preservation and engage in how our design speaks to the place that we live and work. So I just encourage everybody to, wherever you are in the world, to consider designing with context and to think about the responsibility we have as designers. I think if you're designing signage, it's especially true because you're contributing something to the lived environment. And it's a responsibility that I don't think should be taken lightly, because when you put work out into the world in that way, people are going to see it whether they want to see it or not, right? And I think you should consider how your work can speak not just to some, but to all. And I think that's our responsibility as designers. So.
One last question just came in. I think this is really important. We should not ignore it. Do you accept volunteers at the museum? I think if folks actually want to get involved in other ways,
yes.
What's the best way to get in touch with you or the museum to, figure out ways to support you?
Yeah, please send us an email, info@nysignmuseum.org. And we are always looking for volunteers. Regardless of what you do, there's probably some way that you can help. So we have a growing team, and there's lots of opportunities. So please reach out. We always love to hear from people.
Amazing. Well, thank you all so much for staying here, for listening to David and sharing the stories. I want to thank you again, David, for everything. Thank you for such an amazing lecture. And I just want to wish you all have a great afternoon, great morning, great evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you so much for being here. We'll share the recording soon after it's ready. So feel free to share it with your friends. And as usual, follow Noble Signs, follow David's work, and show your support and volunteer if you can. Take care, everyone.
Thank you, Owen.
Thank you, David.
Thank you,
Bye.
everybody.